Hi everybody, my name is Niran Babalola. I work at Consensus. I've been there since 2015, and I'm the founder of a project called Panvala. So what Panvala sets out to solve is this problem in our community of funding the work that the Ethereum community and ecosystem depends on. The Ethereum Foundation is great. It's not that there's a problem there. It's that the foundation's stated goal is to more or less replace itself. It wants to fade away eventually. It has a fixed supply of Ether that it's slowly going to spend down over time. So we need something to replace it. We need to have it something that's actually sustainable, something that's raising funds and deploying it over time rather than just spending down a fixed stock. So what Panvala is a decentralized version of the Ethereum Foundation that actually raises funds instead of spending down a fixed stock. There's a lot of projects in our ecosystem that depend on funding. They're public goods. They're things that don't have a business model of their own. And if we don't find a way to fund them, that work's going to stop happening. We're already seeing symptoms of that where people working on those kinds of things are frustrated. There are people who can't pay their bills, and they're literally working on the stuff that we all depend on. That's a problem, and it needs to be solved. So it's built by a team of 6 people at Consensus. I'm one of them. There's 5 other people, actually 6 other people now, still growing. They'll be around this week at Berlin Blockchain Week. We're launching this week on Thursday at DAppCon, so the whole team's going to be in town to make that happen. So the way that Panvala works is that it's a donor-driven system. It's based on donations. The system itself has no money to start with. It's just smart contracts that are lifeless. I made them up. But what makes them actually work is donors. So we call donors in our system patrons. These are people who are actually making donations to the system. And they do it for 2 reasons. They might depend on work that needs to be funded, so they donate to get the work funded. But they might also just be members of the community that want to have good status in the community. They want to be seen as people that are doing what needs to be done to make sure that things keep moving in our ecosystem. They might be businesses that have that same sort of need. They want the loyalty of the Ethereum community because they sell to people in the Ethereum community. They want to be seen as people that are actually responsible in our community. So these patrons make donations, and they show up to Panvala with Ether. And what Panvala does is it uses Uniswap to switch out that Ether for Panvala tokens. Panvala itself doesn't touch Ether, doesn't touch US dollars. It only touches its own token. So you come to Panvala, you come with Ether, switches out for Panvala. You make your donation in the Panvala token called Pan. Those tokens go to the system's token supply. So it's a fixed supply token. There's 100 million tokens. There will only ever be 100 million tokens. Your donations go to recharge that token supply. You're adding tokens back to the supply so we can keep on issuing grants. Those grants come from that token supply. So we started issuing grants we've been issuing grants all year to teams doing work that the whole community depends on. Those tokens have come out from an initial 50 million tokens that we put in the token supply for grants, and we've been spending those down. Tokens go in to charge it back up. So based on a token vote, each quarter we decide who's going to get grants, and those grants are distributed to those teams. Teams like Sigma Prime, the Nimbus team at Status, Prismatic Labs, various Ethereum 2.0 teams have gotten grants for this. Layer 2 scaling teams like Counterfactual State Channels, Connext, et cetera, have gotten grants from this. We're trying to make sure that all the infrastructure that people depend on is getting tokens from this system. So once you get a grant from the system, you have 2 options. The first option is that you can hold on to this token and use it to vote in the system. That makes sure that the people deciding on who gets grants are actual experts in Ethereum. The people doing the work are the people that can govern the system. They're the ones that have the first option to do that. But also the point of the token is to use it to fund their work. So if you want to fund your work instead of holding it to vote, you sell your tokens to continue the cycle. You sell your tokens to donors. That's how the system works. When you're swapping out your Ether for Panvala tokens, that's you giving your Ether to somebody who received a grant. You're getting Panvala tokens that you put back into the system. That's what completes the cycle that makes the system sustainable. I'm sure there are plenty of questions about this, and I want to rush through this so I can answer those. But that's how the token cycle works. You make donations in Panvala tokens, grants are issued in Panvala tokens, and the cycle continues. So we also have to govern the system, and we do token voting a little bit different than most systems do. There's a lot of problems with token voting. It's hard to get right. We're not certain that we got it right, but this is the path that we've chosen for our system. So when you want to apply for a grant from the system, you send your application in to slate recommenders, people who are going to submit a slate of grants for a whole quarter who should get a grant. Those slate recommenders review those applications and they come up with their opinion of who should receive grants for the current quarter. They put together their list and then they record it on chain. If there's only one slate of grants recorded on chain, that's the people that are going to get grants. There was no dispute. That was the consensus of the community. Nobody had anything different. So that's who gets the grants. But if there are two or more slates of grants that are recorded on chain, that's what actually triggers a token vote. People are voting on which of these slates should actually be approved, which of these grants should go out. You don't vote on individual proposals, you're voting on competing slates. And ideally, you're voting on a slate because you approve of the way that it's been created. It's not necessarily disputing like which grant should be issued at a time, but it's more like kind of a referendum on the constitution of the system. Like, how should we be making decisions? If the slate was created in an approach that I support, even if it didn't produce the right outcome that I support, I still support the process, is the idea. Getting token holders to actually uphold that principle, we'll see if that happens. But at the end of the quarter, one slate wins. And that slate, all the grants on that slate get approved and they get issued on chain. So this quote from Simon de la Riviere really kind of encapsulates why I think this work is so important. What it says is, I'm donating to Panvala because new socially driven organizations could be the key to avoiding a tragedy of the commons for maintaining public networks like Ethereum. This network has been pitched as this way to coordinate people in a more powerful way than has been done before, but our community itself still struggles to solve these problems that need to be solved. And I think we can do that together. The story of this technology so far has been one about amassing private wealth. People who've gotten rich quick because they bought the right token at the right time, and there's all sorts of stories on the news about it, so more of the public gets drawn into this too. The story that I would like to be on the news is one about not private wealth, but common wealth. This idea that we can produce wealth for our own community by building the tools and infrastructure that we depend on so we can actually do the work that we want to do. That's what actually motivates me to be in this community in the first place. To me, Ethereum isn't about code. It's not about having the most effective code base. It's about having the most effective people who are committed to actually making progress together. That's our competitive advantage. It's people. And if we can coordinate people to make progress on the most important issues in our community, I think there's no limit to what we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, it was actually the moment that you mentioned that you wanted to get to questions like when it came to sustainability. So people get the Panvala tokens, and then you get to the cycle of like they sell their tokens, etc. But how do you get to sustainability there? I would love to know more about that one.
So that's a good question. So these grants are being issued in Panvala tokens. So when we issue them, it's not saying that, hey, you're getting this many US dollars or this many euros. It's saying, hey, you're getting this many Panvala tokens. You can fund as much work as you can get for those Panvala tokens. So if there are donations coming through, those donations are the demand for the Panvala token. And depending on what the demand for the Panvala token is, that's how much work we can actually fund. So the system conceptually works at any price with any level of demand. That just determines the amount of work we can actually fund. If it can only fund $10,000 of work every quarter, then that's how much we should fund. But if it can fund $30 million a year, the way the Ethereum Foundation intends to fund, that's how much we'd fund. And if we can fund even more than that, we would do that as well, and that's the goal.
So, like, how do you see working with the patrons? Would it be like continuous donations, or would it be like yearly or quarterly requests? Maybe you have any ideas about that?
So right now, for the initial system, we're kind of hamstrung by the restrictions of blockchain technology in general. You can't do recurring payments. You have to come back every time you want to make a payment, which sucks. It's really bad. But we're going to do a lot of work to get people to come back. People who make a pledge to commit a certain amount every month, we're gonna contact them. We're gonna say, hey, your donation has expired. Come back, contribute again. Over time, we hope we can solve that problem. It doesn't necessarily need to be people making their donations directly on chain. Maybe you can have an intermediary that's doing it for you because you've given them access to some sort of payment method that they can charge on a recurring basis. Eliminating that friction is, in the long run, is key to the system's success. But right now, we're gonna pester people to get them to come back. Sorry, everybody, but it'll be worth it.
Hi, are you familiar with like Gitcoin grants? So they do recurring payments, so maybe that's a model you could look at for the recurring payments. I have a question about the Panvala token, it's really an existential question. So like Moloch DAO, people come in, they contribute ETH, they get shares, they vote with the shares. If they don't like a proposal, they can rage quit and get their money back. But at the end of the day, grant recipients are receiving the ETH that was put in to start with. And ETH is, very liquid, multi-billion-dollar market, etc. From a grant recipient standpoint, to me, it would be much more appealing to just receive the ETH that people were putting in to, the contract to begin with. So like, why introduce this new token that introduces additional uncertainty about, the liquidity of the funds that grant recipients are actually receiving?
So that's a great question, and there are two parts to that answer. So the first part is that all the ETH going into the system does go directly to grant recipients. The Panvala is not holding any ETH. There's no ETH that goes into it. So when you switch out your Ether for the Panvala tokens, you literally gave your Ether to a grant recipient. So all the donations are going to grant recipients. They hold Pan tokens to begin with, but all the donors that we've organized to donate to the system are giving their Ether to them. But the reason to have a token in the first place is because in a normal foundation, you might have 2 or 3 people on the staff who are doing work to get more donations in the door. They get their paycheck, they get rewarded because they bring more donations in the door. When you have a token to be the intermediary for the system, instead of having 2 or 3 people, you can have 1,000 people, you can have 1,000,000 people who actually have an incentive to bring more donations in the door. And that's the reason that we built the system. We believe that it's not that there's not a willingness to fund this work among the businesses and individuals in our community. It's that actually organizing people is hard. In Peter's talk a couple minutes ago, he talked about how hard it is to just organize people. And it's really hard work, and there has to be some incentive to make that happen. The token is the incentive to make that happen. We think that no one has ever really used this sort of mechanism to organize nonprofit donations before. And if it actually works, I think it'll be considerably more effective than just having 2 or 3 people on the staff trying to get people to donate.
It's a bit of data. Do I understand it correctly that all Ether that Panvala holds is actually contained in Uniswap, in the Uniswap Panvala Ether pair?
So not exactly. So Uniswap is just a convenience method to guarantee that there will always be a place for donors to get Panvala tokens to donate. If you show up to the Panvala site and you want to make a donation, there needs to be kind of a source of last resort to let you get your Panvala tokens and donate to the system. But you can get Panvala tokens any way you want. You can literally go to the Nimbus team at Status and say, hey, I will give you $500 US, send me some Pan tokens, and then donate it to the system. So it's not that Uniswap is holding ETH on behalf of Panvala, it's just convenience liquidity so donors can always get tokens from the system. The actual value that's flowing through the system is going from donors to grant recipients all the time, even if sometimes Uniswap is in the middle of that.
If I understand it correctly, the system is hard-coded so that you have 1 grant recipient per quarter, or?
So that's one way to think about it, but it's one slate of grants. So the idea is instead of governing individual proposals, we're governing our entire consensus. We're just saying this is one competing vision of the consensus of this community. Here's another competing consensus of this community, and you vote between those two. You don't vote on every individual proposal because that's hard. Instead, you say, hey, if we can all agree and there's only one vision for what we should do this quarter, there's no vote. You just execute it.
And a slate is like a number of grants and each one has a percentage.
Exactly that.
Okay, right. If I'm not happy with the slate, I can actually propose that the money goes back to Panvala, right? So if I think all of these proposals are rubbish, then as a conservative Panvala holder, I can I can propose to keep the money in Panvala.
As long as you do it before the deadline. So you can, when you propose a slate, your slate doesn't have to have any proposals in it. It can be an empty slate. So if you think that the consensus of the community is to hold off, there's too much division, there's too much discord, we just shouldn't make a decision this quarter, you propose an empty slate. But when you propose a slate, you're staking tokens on it. So you're taking that risk. You're saying that what I'm representing is truly the consensus of the community, and I'm willing to put my tokens where my mouth is. So if you think that's the consensus, you stake your tokens on your recommendation, and they vote for it. And if you're right, no tokens get distributed that quarter.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great talk.